Development Smart Growth Grant. The grant that we are seeking is regarding these subject parcels, 246 Main, 252 Main, and 254 Main. Also involved in the subject areas 47 Chestnut and 39 Chestnut. As you can see, those are the three properties on Main Street, here, here, and here. And then there's a residential property behind this building. And then there's 39 Chestnut is a property that comes in. It's the Graziani property that sits to the rear, the narrow driveway in, and then sits to the rear of these three parcels. So the subject area is again redefined here as it comes from Maine, encompasses all the property up to the corner of Chestnut, up Chestnut, then back around here, and then this is the driveway to the Graziani property, and then back down. These are the preliminary engineering plans, which I understand pretty much are impossible to read in their current form. But the highlight is basically we're seeking just $1.6 million from the state of Connecticut to obtain the funds necessary to go in and regrade, to regrade the slope behind those three properties. You know there's a pretty substantial slope, about 25 feet up from Main Street level. It's in extremely bad state of repair, not to mention trees that are tumbling down and erosion, but there's a series of sort of a mishmash of retaining walls that are in various stages of disrepair, and they're broken. The plan is to come in and erect a new three-tiered retaining wall system behind those buildings. The first tier would essentially be the rear, the back side of the buildings. Then there'd be a second tier and a third tier. Worked into that system would be a walkway or promenade that would connect all of those properties with a walkway to the rear. You would be able to then obtain access to the upper levels of those buildings on Main from the walkways in the rear. We also are in the process of negotiating to acquire the Graziani property, and this would provide a parking area to the rear of those buildings. The buildings that we hope to develop are those that are consistent with our new Main Street overlay zone, which are traditional Main Street style buildings. They would have, generally it would be residential over retail or restaurant buildings. This is not the retaining wall, this is an idea of the type of retaining wall that we're talking about in the rear, and the type of sidewalk that would be to the rear. So if we have the residential over retail buildings, then we would have access for the residents in the back, and they can enter from the back, and then access for the businesses directly on Main Street. And as you may be aware, we're waiting to hear on a prior grant of $3 million to redo Main Street to provide angled-in parking in this area. So there'd be the angled-in parking all the way down in front of these three buildings, and would then change to parallel parking a little bit further down. There's even some additional parking on the back. Oh, and there's also there's also the three-tiered retaining wall system, the promenade we've discussed. So think of this walkway, it would be at an elevation of basically sort of a second or third floor elevation to the rear of these properties. I can tell you that from that point, the view out over the canal and river is awesome. It's great. You can have benches, you can have different things back there as well. And also then you could tie in, because the Windsor Locks Housing Authority, which owns the next block of property from the Mr. Grill's building down to the corner of Oak,
they're also investigating, looking into developing the front of their property on Main Street with, again, residential over commercial, properties. They have developers particularly interested in doing it. They, of course, need to get the approval of HUD and all that, but they own that lot. But that promenade could be interconnected to the rear of their property as well, and you'd have this nice sort of sloping, area that you could walk down all the way from Oak Street to the corner of Chestnut Street. Again, this is the type, general idea of the type of residence that we're looking at for the area. We have adjusted, or we put an overlay into our planning and zoning regulations that will facilitate this type of housing. It's called a Main Street Overlay Zone, and it gives the developers relief from zoning restrictions that might prevent them from otherwise doing this type of thing. So density restrictions, parking numbers, side yard requirements, and this is something that's already been approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And of course, this is exactly what the developers are interested in, this type of development want. Keep in mind these letters, TOD, TOD. You're going to hear it 100 times at least over the next couple of years. That stands for transit-oriented development. And without mincing words, basically the governor's transportation plan is all centered on transit-oriented development. And if you want to get money to redevelop areas like Main Street, then you better make sure that you're responsive to that trend. This is really not part of this grant, but I wanted to show you what's sort of a cross-section of the street level that would be in front of these buildings. So the right side of the screen is the sidewalks that would be in front of the buildings that we're talking about. Then you would have diagonal parking spaces, a 4-foot textured strip, the diagonal, so that you drive over, so you have a feel for when you're, packing, you know that you're out of your space. 11-foot travel lane southbound, a 11-foot travel lane northbound, an 8-foot width parking space, a tree berm or tree wells, and then a 10-foot multi-use bicycle and pedestrian pathway. What's really nice about that, because that will connect the new transit center, the historic train station, and on that side of the street, and you'll be able to get from there all the way across the Route 140 bridge in East Windsor, or you can cross at the new transit center and go up and over the canal and get onto the bike path from there. So it establishes both pedestrian and bicycle connectivity to all those areas. The measurements have been taken by the planners, and we're told that this is feasible, this layout. I hope they're right, but ultimately, part of this grant calls for the engineering funds available to determine if that is in fact right. I mean, the wiggle room you have, I guess, is if you're short, is removing the 8-foot parking space on the east side of the street. That would give you a little room, but we're told by the planners that this can be done. So if we get the grant money and we hire the engineers, then we'll know for sure whether or not. All right, this is the breakdown of what we're requesting. It's actually 1.7 million, well, 1,695,700. And if you can't see from the distance, it's basically the acquisition costs, options or deposits of any land that we would need to acquire, legal closing fees, appraisals and title searches, 15,000, environmental reviews of 5, engineering and permitting of 30,000, site survey of 12, geotechnical testing of 2,000, preferred developer RFP cert process, that's to put things out to bid, 3, the construction costs themselves of $1,558,000 and change, and then environmental studies of the development sites, $20,000. These figures have been the subject of much discussion by our engineers, by our planners. It's gone back and forth, but they feel confident that this is the number that can do the job. Built into that construction cost is two 15% variances, for one for contingencies and one for, I'm sorry, I don't have that one, you know, the contractors will build in, one contingency, but cost overruns, that type of thing. So there's basically 30% built in on top of what the actual construction cost should be to cover any unanticipated overruns. This particular grant does not require a matching contribution from the town of Windsor Locks. You can have a matching contribution from the town of Windsor Locks, which could enhance your ability to get the grant, but we did not add one in at this time from the town. So this would be 100% financing from the state of Connecticut if we get the grant. Now, as far as the properties themselves, the idea ultimately is get to the point where we tear down and redevelop. Certainly in the middle lot, which is the former, for the old timers, the former post office, John Shoe Repair, referred to Mr. Montefusco, you know the yellow building that the tree fell on a few years ago. And the town is in the process of acquiring that building through foreclosure. And it will be torn down, and that will give us the access we need to gain access to do the repairs on either side. I want to be clear, I saw Mr. Storms wince in the back when I said through foreclosure. Currently there's WPCA liens that are being foreclosed. They have been sold to an individual who is continuing the foreclosure, and that individual has agreed to give the town the property once he's completed the foreclosure. In exchange for that, we've offered to, if he wants to take the property back for development himself, that we would give him a first option to do so. I think that's only fair. The properties to either side, we got Mr. Brill's property to the south. He's agreed to participate to the fullest extent and support this grant application to allow access to do the improvements to the rear of his property. And there's also some talk of him making changes to his building. His building is really the best of the three, by a wide margin. He may make some changes to his building that would bring his building more into compliance with the Main Street overlay zone type of building we're looking at. So that's very exciting that he's agreed to participate in that. The building on the corner of Chestnut, old Mr. Hussein's building, the redevelopment of that property would be subject, it would be up to him, he's the property owner, although he has expressed interest in participating with the town for the improvements to the rear as well, and he has expressed a desire to tear down and rebuild what's there. Again, properties consistent with the Main Street overlay zone. And then we've had no less than 3 developers express interest in that middle lot. Obviously the one who we're going to acquire it from, but also 2 others have expressed interest in acquiring it from the town so they could do something along these lines. So that's the general gist of the proposal, is that what we're going to put into it is the improvements to that hillside to make those lots ready for redevelopment. Where there's private ownership rights, those private ownership rights will remain, but we hope that by making solving the problem with the eroding and collapsing hillside, that we make those properties suitable for redevelopment. And then the center property we hope to acquire, and again, market and then get that back into the hands of the developer who will do these changes. So and with parking in the back to support the residential, parking in the front to support the commercial, and the parking studies have been done, even with existing parking regulations, to be sufficient parking space to meet those needs. Even though under the Main Street overlay zone, there's a chance that you could actually lessen those parking requirements. As it stands now, we have enough now to meet the needs of the building. So that's what we want to accomplish. Like I said, all we're asking now is the authority to ask the state for this money. I will be candid and tell you that we got contacted by the state of Connecticut with regard to this particular grant, and they said, we believe that Windsor Locks should seriously consider applying for this grant. So that was a good hint to me. Sometimes I don't get hints that quickly, but that one I got. So it's very important that we get an application in, a good application, and this is a strong application. Its due date is the 4th. So I'm asking your support tonight for that. That's all I have on that.
Thank you, Mr. Kervick. Peter, could you give me the light switch, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Glazier, then you, and I think somebody in the back. Okay.
Yes,
1, 2, 3.
Douglas Street, 7 Jack Lane, Chris, I think it's $1.6 million for this project, for redoing the bank there, the retaining wall, the 3-tier retaining wall, and so forth. Who came up with that $1.6 million estimate?
The town engineer in consultation with the town planner. The two of them together worked those numbers.
Town engineer, Russo and Associates?
Yes.
They came up with that, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you'd like to see it, I don't have it in this presentation, but I have his cost, estimate. And it's really, the number is like 895 for the retaining wall itself, or all the construction.
Yeah.
But when you add that 15% and on top of a 15%, you get up to a higher number.
Yeah, I know you got your engineering costs and your contingencies, administration,
Contingencies.
all that.
It adds up.
Okay.
We don't
So
want to
you
cut it
feel
short.
it's a good figure, and therefore applying for the grant, the 1.6 million grant, it's anticipated that that full amount will be forthcoming if the grant is approved by, what agency, I don't know.
Yes, Mr. Goody. In fact, the last thing I heard from the planner, he stated that he thought it was an extremely conservative estimate. So that was good to hear.
Michael, you were next.
Yeah, Michael Bracken, 12 Tinker Drive. I just got a couple of comments. I was talking to the property owner about that property that you were talking about at the bottom of the hill.
Which one? Oh, Mr. Hussein, okay.
And I know that he intends on keeping the building that he has there the way that it is. As a matter of fact, he said that he's put some brickwork up around it, and he plans on putting a lean-to and a second story on it. But he told me that he owns the houses behind it
He does.
in the property, and his intention is to buy that 10-foot piece of property. As a matter of fact, he said the town approached him about buying the 10-foot piece of property alongside of it so he can hide his dumpster there. And the thing is that I know that your law firm represents him, and I'm just curious, are you gonna step out of that picture somehow? So we don't want anybody saying that there's that there's any problems with that. And I know that you have somebody taking over your cases while you're first selectman, but, just the scenario where it is your law firm that's doing the work, although it's a different attorney handling
I
it,
understand.
you don't want anybody saying that there's anything.
So, remember, Mr. Hussein is a private property. He has an opportunity to do with his property as he wishes. There's zoning, if there's blight laws, or zoning laws, there's different things that can be enforced if he doesn't, meet certain standards. But ultimately, it's up to him to determine what he wants to do. The best we can do is incentivize, that's a word that planners use and politicians use, incentivize him to do repairs that are consistent with what we want to see there. And if you think about it, if the rest of these repairs go in, he would be foolish to leave his building as it is now, because the opportunities for enhancing the value of his property are great if he does a little bit more with his property. But we can't force him to do that, and nor would we try.
Well, I think that the idea is to probably try to get the town to try to buy it, because I know that he discussed that at one point too, and that he said that he's gonna ask top dollar. And like I said, eventually, look what happened in New London with Pfizer. They just went in and took stuff by eminent domain.
Yeah.
And what's to prevent the town from
There's no-
doing that and paying you,
There's no plan to acquire property by eminent domain at this time.
my other.
I also, to respond to your, I would not venture, or I would not feel highly about the possibility of successfully negotiating anything with Mr. Hussein when it comes to the price of his property. So that is not part of the plan as it stands now. If somehow there's an offer made where he wants us to acquire it and it's at a fair price, I suppose we would consider that. But that's not part of the plan as we have it now, because I think it would be presumptuous to expect that to happen. So what we're trying to do is incentivize it, make the changes necessary to that property, and give him the benefit of that retaining wall so that his property is more developable, whether he wants to tear down what's there and rebuild, whether he wants to incorporate what's there into something else. That's ultimately will be his decision. Oh, and the parking behind, yes. He has also, he has that property behind, and he may, would be his call, but just as there's gonna be parking to the rear of the other two buildings, he could use that for parking to the rear of his building, and that would be consistent with the overall plan.
Well, it was surprising because he drew a map of all the stuff that he owns, and I didn't know that he owned so much there. It's
On a
almost
napkin?
like
Was
he
it on a
owns the
napkin?
whole bottom.
Was it on the napkin?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was. But, you know, I have one other question. I think the last selectman was talking about real quick, Joe. He was talking about a tram to connect the new train station to the airport, to the mall. And I'm wondering how they're planning on doing that, because are they planning on running that up North Street or doing?
Yeah, the state's plans for the transit, remember, it's not the subject of tonight's meeting, but the state's plans for the
It's part
transit,
of the development.
the state's plans for the new transit center involve not trams, but a bus. Yeah, rubber wheel vehicles to transport people from the train station to the airport. The route that they will take, they haven't disclosed. I'm pretty sure that they're anticipating Route 20, but based on some informal discussions, but that's not, they're not pinned to that. But that is part of the plan for the state.
I thought we were talking about another route.
People mover, yeah.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much. You're next, Mr. Tria.
Explain to me the traffic flow coming down Main Street, going up Chestnut.
The traffic flow improvements that we hope to make are not part of this grant request. Think of them as two sides of the same coin. You've got what's called a LoTSIP grant request for $3 million that's pending. We're waiting to hear on that. And that's for the improvements to the street itself. And then you have this grant request for what, under the TOD Smart Growth Grant Program for $1.7 million, and that's to deal with these three properties on Main, that are on Main Street. So the LoTSIP grant, the $3 million, is basically designed to bring traffic calming measures to the area. As you know, people come around that curve, usually they're almost on two wheels when they do. We need to slow that traffic down.
Up by going up Chestnut Street Hill?
Well, that's not, the planner has suggested that, but that's been by no means determined. The planner has also suggested a traffic circle at the base of Chestnut Street. That will have to, the engineering studies will have to determine whether or not that's feasible or wise. So there's nothing etched in stone on either of these. But what we want is a traditional style Main Street where, I think downtown Manchester, for example, where you have the angled in parking, that's what we're really going for. And the type of buildings on there that, although modern, are reminiscent of the traditional Main Street structure.
Free or need or parking?
Remains to be determined.
Thank you. Joe, you done with that? Okay, you're next, and then you're next after that. Go ahead.
What happened to the low-income housing they were talking about for those lots? We went to a planning and zoning, when was it? I'm gonna say 10 months ago. And those lots you're talking about, they were actually talking, again, using Todd, they were talking about low-income housing with those angled parking. Is that since changed, or?
There was a incentive housing zone study conducted that made some recommendations for infill and the type of what our needs were in the town. And it felt there was some suggestion that there would be room for additional, we gotta use the right term. Workforce housing is the term they use now, which is different from affordable housing, significantly different. Or low-income housing. Workforce housing is where 1 out of every 5 units has a either rent or sales price restriction that is tied into the area median income. As it turns out in Windsor Locks, that restriction would pretty much be the same as market rate, so it really wouldn't factor in too much in Windsor Locks. But in any event, that has not been adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission at this point, the recommendations to create this incentive housing zone. The developers that I've spoken with at this point are not talking about low income or workforce or anything in that area. They're talking about market rate rentals. The developer that's interested in the housing authority property, I imagine, would be interested in having some workforce or other controlled component to those. I think they're even talking about adding additional units for senior housing there, and the housing above. That's not anything that's within our control. That's something that the Housing Authority will ultimately decide, you know, how they want to go. But that's sort of where we are now.
Well, I'd like to incentivize us to look at not taking state money. Just be careful, think about it, because I know the planning and zoning folks spend a lot of time basically telling us, when you take state money, they expect stuff in return, so.
This particular state money we're asking for carries with it no obligation to have any particular type of housing. It's not, there's no quid pro quo on this grant application. There are other loan programs or grant programs, I imagine, that do, but not this particular one. This one is basically, the design of the project is sort of up to us. My thinking and the thinking of the planners in town was, if we're gonna expect any change in the Main Street area, we gotta start at the area that is the most blighted, the most run down. And I think most people agree that housing, the buildings on that curve, they're almost an impediment to anything further in the neighborhood. Because if you have a dump across the street from you, why would you put money into your property a little farther up or across the street? So we decided that let's focus where our attention needs to be focused most, and let's try and solve this problem first, and then build out from there.
But this is just a study, right?
No, this isn't a study, this is construction money. This is, if we get this grant, we get our engineer out there, it starts drawing up, and we may have shovels in the ground by the fall. Real money.
Thank you. Mr. Russo, you're up.
Lee Russo, 407 Elmwood Drive, town. In light of our fantastic ability to manage our money here in the state of Connecticut, and as the Yard Goats Stadium down in Hartford with the cost overruns, if there is a cost overrun on this project, who does it fall on?
If there's a cost overrun, well, if you mean it goes outside of the.
Yeah, you're getting a grant, it's X amount of dollars, we get there. I have no faith in these contractors' ability to deliver a project within whatever they quote. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Who gets it? The taxpayers? Cost overrun.
Any further discussion?
Um,
Yes, ma'am.
I know that we're just voting on getting grant applications on, say it's approved. What bids have to be?
The bids would be for the construction work, because there are strings attached to that grant, that statement, because always, when you're doing, with a state contract, you have to do, contractors who are qualified. No. Contractors who have, prevailing wage, meet prevailing wage standards, and certain other standards set up by the state of Connecticut.
Once, if we get the grant money, when the bids go out, will we be looking at keeping it in Connecticut?
I'd look to keep it in Windsor Locks if we have contractors that are qualified. But the question is whether or not there's local contractors who can qualify for the state requirements for the bid. It's the same issue we ran into with the train station. And it results in higher bids generally. So, but that has been factored into the estimates that the engineers made.
I gotta see if anybody else wants to be the first time. Anybody else for the first time? Yes, sir.
Chris, can you just go over one more?
Name and address, sir?
David Beer. Can you just go over again, one more time, how much contingency is built into the estimate?
It's 30%, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't know the terms used. I think one is contingency and the other one is something else. But it's 15% on one and then 15% again. So you inflate the figure by 15% and then you inflate it again by 15% to get to the bottom line that's included in there, the 1,550 feet. So really, it's like 100,000 is what it should be done for, but they built in. I wonder if the state's gonna say, that's too much, but that's up to them.
Mr. Glazier?
Well,
There's nobody else for the first time, right? Okay.
Yeah, my question was, I'll have that for a second part. The first part was just what we were talking about. On these contingencies, usually there's a contingency on administration and engineering, and then there's a contingency on construction. So you always have two contingencies. That's what the two contingency costs are associated with.
Thank you.
You don't mind me?
No, I appreciate it, thank you.
My other question is, in the grant application itself, I know there's a lot of legal verbiage in there governing it, but is there anything in there that says, if the cost of this project for the amount, the 1.6, if there are cost overruns, that those cost overruns have to be paid for by the town of Windsor Locks?
There's no language to that.
There's no language? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
I just, it probably goes on with Mr. Glazer, what he was just saying, but I know that I was involved in one of the fire trucks being purchased, and I know that they have performance bonds and stuff. Isn't that something that could prevent the town from being held responsible for no-cost overrun?
I want to say yes, Mike, but I'm not 100% sure, but I believe performance bonds are part of the bidding process.
Seems like we're pretty much, oh, Mr. Hamilton, I thought you would.
Not so sure, nobody can say so. University of Connecticut had performance bonds associated with the implementation of their new construction and et cetera. But that still cost the taxpayers $27.6 million just for one facility.
He can't, he's a little louder, Mr.
Ultimately, I'm afraid it falls back on either the state in the sense of Yukon or the town in the sense of with the performance bond, even if it's a flood. There was a performance bond in Hartford, okay, on the yard case, and I love that name. And yet they went over by $10 million, $5 million of which was picked up by the taxpayers of Hartford. $2.3 million was picked up by the construction company, but it's interesting that